Mark Kimmitt, he is a former Deputy Assistant U.S. Secretary of State, and Savannah Lane, she is the communications manager for the Turkish Heritage Organization. She joins us from Washington. Hi, Savannah. I'm going to start with you, and I want to get straight, actually, to a key issue for Turkey, really. I'm going to venture, actually, outside the Middle East and address a U.S. foreign policy issue that I should say is very close to Turkey's heart. That is the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. There is a strong Armenian lobby, as you know, in the United States, which Biden has expressed some sympathy for. So combine that with a Congress that really isn't too shy to lose out on weapons sales revenue for what they think are the U.S. best interest. What kind of approach do you think the U.S. could take toward Turkey and Azerbaijan?
Well, first, let me say thank you so much for having me, and it's an honor to be joined by Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. He is a fantastic speaker that we've worked with as well here in D.C. Now, this issue is very interesting because, as you mentioned, the Armenian lobby is strong here in the United States. And what I have seen so far, just in the reactions from the Biden campaign and the Trump administration, is that in addressing the developments in the conflict in Armenia, Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh, they are clearly demonstrating that it is an election year, and they're treading very carefully, treading very lightly. Now, we see, as it's stated on the public campaign election website from the Biden campaign, and also comments that he's made along the campaign trail, he's leaning into this disengaged America First Trump impression and trying to show that Trump is not involved in this conflict and the developments. We'll get to Trump's involvement in a moment, but Biden is really leaning in on this Russian involvement, and that he is calling for continued diplomacy and also tough reaction to Turkey. On his website and other comments, he was quoted saying that there needs to be to stop coddling Ankara. And so there is certainly this reaction that he will be tough on Turkey as it relates to the developments and Azerbaijan itself. And again, playing this idea that Trump is passive as it relates to the developments. Now, Trump himself, President Trump and his administration, Mike Pompeo has spoken to both foreign ministers in Armenia, Azerbaijan. But again, this is an election time, and so he was very vague in public comments as it relates to American Armenians and for those involved in the conflict. So I think we're going to continue to see vagueness surrounding that. But I do think that it is pretty clear that the relationship between President Trump and President Erdogan is something that will continue to develop should he remain president. And we are going to see sort of a toughness from potential President Biden.
Okay. Mark, are you on the same page there? I mean, the reason we really do need to talk about this as well is not just because of Turkey. I mean, all major proxy powers are linked in ways to the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. There's a lot at stake here. So it is important, you know, with either another Trump White House or a Biden White House, what stance the U.S. takes.
Well, first of all, it's great to be on with a professional like Savannah Lane as well. I would simply tell you that, candidly, the United States is going to hand this over to the Minsk group. We just don't have, in an election season, the throw weight to be able to devote to finding ourselves a position in this conflict. I think we're going to send a couple of ambassadors, such as our ambassador to the Minsk group, to have him try to do what we can. But honestly, this is an unfortunate time to be depending on American leadership because American leadership is tied up elsewhere.
Okay, but what about post-election and when it is raised again? Because the U.S. Congress has taken some controversial positions, for Turkey at least, regarding issues with Armenia. You know, Turkey's been very disappointed in some of the decisions made by the U.S. Congress that have prior been stamped by the White House. So it does matter. After this election, now, when they do have the energy again, what could they do?
That's a good point, but the question is, when will they have that energy? When you're looking at a brand new administration, which it looks likely is going to happen, first of all, you need to assemble a team. The next thing you need to do is get through the election itself, the coronation, for lack of a better term, itself, and then get yourself in those offices. I mean, those people don't even have offices on January 21st. And it's going to be months before they come together as a cohesive team. And candidly and sadly, even though there's a conflict going on in this critical area, Congress may be jumping up and down saying, do something about this. But there's no oxygen in the room when you're talking about Russia, when you're talking about China, when you're talking about Israel, when you're talking about other Middle East issues. And I think, candidly, there are people inside a potential Trump administration that are praying that this issue is solved before they're in charge.
Right. Savannah, let me ask you, and again, we're going to get to the Middle East, but I mean, there's a lot to talk about as well, just in geopolitics in general. And we haven't had a lot of time to really talk about where another administration, be it Biden or Trump, could take the relationship with NATO, with the European Union, and especially how that relates to Turkey, especially when it comes to issues like the Eastern Mediterranean and Greece, for example.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I think NATO is a really interesting thing to examine at this point in the election. As I mentioned earlier, Trump has really played into this America First idea, and that has been really playing well to his base. And he has criticized pretty publicly NATO and, of course, the burden sharing idea. Now, first and foremost, this is not a unique criticism under President Trump, President Obama. Many other administrations have criticized NATO as it relates to burden sharing. So I want to make that clear. But I think that if we see a potential Biden administration, it's going to be twofold. One, he is leaning in on this idea that he is going to be the candidate to resolve and play back into alliances, the importance of collaboration internationally, and of course, a leaning into his European allies as it relates to alliances internationally. Simultaneously, that also plays into Turkey's role. The S-400 debacle has certainly continued to develop, and people in the Pentagon, the State Department, were pretty unhappy with the recent test. So I think regardless of administration, we're going to see a continued push for S-400, a reaction to CAATSA sanctions. But I think that it will be important to see if it is a Biden administration, we may see harsher sanctions, or we may also see that he is trying to show that he is the person to continue pushing for alliances, which may give a little bit more leeway to the U.S.-Turkey relationship. Either way, it's a critical component of the NATO alliance. But again, it's going to be whether or not we see a Biden or Trump administration, I think will be important to determine the path.
Gotcha. Quickly, Mark, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I would also say that I think it would take, candidly, an outreach by Turkey to make some concessions on their part before the new administration would be able to forestall any CAATSA sanctions coming up from the United States Congress.
Okay. Now, Middle East relations, I promise we'd get to them, and I mean, there are so many, and they are fundamental, really, to the region, particularly because, Savannah, the role that Donald Trump has played in trying to broker peace between Israel and the Palestinians, bring certain Arab partners into closer relations with Israel. Some in the Arab world think it's fantastic. Others think it is devastating to the Palestinians, and it's polarized a lot of people, to be honest. But where do you think that process would go, particularly if the White House changes hands?
Well, I think first and foremost, we've seen a lot of vague comments as it relates, especially to the developments in the Middle East, whether it's with the Israeli-Palestinian ongoing developments and conflicts, whether it's with the Saudis. There are so many different components, so it'd be difficult to answer in, a quick 30 seconds because it is so nuanced. However, what I do think is important is that many are suggesting that a potential Biden administration would look very similar to an Obama administration in the Middle East. So we have to, of course, analyze the Iranian component here. The Iranian relationship, Trump has consistently been harsh with sanctions, with maximum pressure campaigns against Iran. And I think that would continue, of course, if he were to be a president in the next term. Now, if we see a Biden administration, we're going to see kind of a reversal, a review, if you will, of what the relationships may look like in the Middle East. You're certainly right. It is polarizing, but something that I think people are not commenting enough about, of course, is the role of oil. I think that is common to focus on in the Middle East. And so we've seen people with a robust interest in oil to be favoring, of course, Donald Trump. And then we have seen sort of a careful treading as it relates to the potential Biden administration, which it does look like it's going to be at this point.
Right. Mark, actually, if you don't mind, because we've spoken about that question at length, I wanted to hear from Savannah as well. So I would like you, before you go, to actually talk a little bit more about the U.S. plans going forward in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria as well. Trump has said he doesn't want U.S. troops involved in foreign wars anymore, but we saw under the Obama administration, they obviously think there is a clear role for the U.S. to play militarily in all three of those countries.
Yeah, I would simply say that it was striking that the only sentence that I could find in the Biden platform that agreed with Donald Trump was the bullet point, end forever wars. They're both looking to reduce forces in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and reduce combat operations around the world. They will still maintain large numbers of deterrence forces, but not combat forces.
Okay, and you think that's savvy? Especially when Daesh is raising its head the way it is now in Afghanistan.
Well, the question really is, are we going to completely pull out, and can that fight against Daesh be done by troops on the ground or bringing in specialized troops on an as-needed basis?
Okay. Mark, I'll let you have the last word there. Thank you so much. Mark Kimmitt and Savannah Lane, both so much for joining us with your analysis there. We appreciate it.